Predict, pick, and prevail in your fantasy football leagues with Nick Giacobbe and Nick Kap. From breakouts to busts, superstars to sleepers, these are the guys that will help you achieve fantasy glory. This is the PrimeTime Fantasy Podcast.
Welcome, everybody, to Season 4, Episode 43 of the PrimeTime Fantasy Football Podcast, where we give you our predictions, our picks, with the hopes that we help you prevail throughout Week 12 and the rest of the 2024 fantasy football season. I am your host, Nick Giacobbe. Joining me is Nick Kap. He's a little bit under the weather. After 11 weeks, his Jets have finally gotten to him. He has caught whatever virus that they have with that franchise, but we're still here to give you all the fantasy football information you need for Week 12 that is loaded up with a bajillion bye weeks, which is messing me up. And yeah.
Hey, listen, I drafted my team intentionally deciding that I want people on the same bye weeks. I know people, if you watch like those fantasy 101 tutorials, they always say, do not draft players with the same bye week. And I'm here to tell you, I hate that idea. I think you should only draft players with the same bye week. I'd rather not have 9 weeks of my team being at 80, 90%. I'd rather have the 1 week where we got to fill it in with the scrubs. That's me personally. No, I'm an outlier in that one, but I got one league where I have 5 or 6 of my starters on bye. So I'm feeling it this week, but that's why we're here. We're going to tell you who to replace those studs with, and which one of those studs you think you have in your lineup and maybe you don't want in your lineup.
I kind of agree with you. However, when it comes to Week 12 and I look at my team and I have starting quarterback 2 in the season, Joe Burrow, top 10 running back, Bijan Robinson, solid player, and T. Higgins all on bye, it does not get a lot of fun to have everybody on bye when I'm 6-5 in our league. And, you know, my team's pretty decent. I mean, my points forced is 3rd right now. So, I mean, I have a good team. My points against is 9th, which I think means that I actually don't get scored on a lot. No, I do get scored on. Yeah, I do get scored on a lot. Or maybe, I don't know. I'm trying to figure. No, I don't. I'm 9th, but everybody's within like 15,000 points. But anyway, yeah, I mean, I'm 6-5. I'm currently tied for 3rd, but I'm behind in the points a little bit there. So I'm tied for 3rd, but yeah, our league's really, really tight. There's within the top 10, there's everybody's 5-6 or 6-5. So very, very tight. So that's not fun to have all those bye weeks creeping up on me, but that's why we're here to help you with the fantasy football teams. And if this is your first time listening or watching our show, thank you so much. This is the PrimeTime Fantasy Football Podcast. You get 3 shows from us a week, a show on Tuesday, a show on Thursday/Friday that is pre-recorded, and then you get a live show on Sundays, 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time, available on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram, where we answer all of your fantasy football questions. Your trade deadline is probably passed, but we'll answer your trade questions. We answer a lot of start-sit questions, maybe some players that you need to pick up off the waiver wire, especially with the players coming up. So join us this Sunday, as we do every Sunday, 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram, so we can give you all of your fantasy football information that you need to crush Week 12. Like I said, this is our Friday show, and if you're a first-time viewer or listener on the Friday show, we give you our all boom and all bust teams. So we're going to delve into that. And then we end the show with a deep sleeper segment where me and Nick each give you a deep sleeper that we think you should pick up before this week, just in case you have to beat the waiver wire for next week. So let's start off with our all boom and all bust teams, and I'll explain kind of how these teams work. So for the all boom team, we give you players that are basically fringe players or flex players that we think are going to boom this week and should be in your lineups. This affects injuries, this affects bad matchups, this affects bye weeks. So on an all boom team, it is rare that you will see Christian McCaffrey or Jamar Chase. You really won't see guys like that on the all boom team. It's more so guys that maybe you're on, you weren't sure about starting, you know, tight ends at quarterbacks. It's probably the bottom 10 guys or whatever. But anyway. All right, Nick. So Nick got first dibs on the all boom team this week. I think I only know one of his players, and I got priority on the all bust team. So Nick, who is your all boom quarterback? I think I know who it is, and I did not take him specifically hoping/thinking you would take him.
Because he's a my guy.
He is your guy, and I think he was on your was he your all boom last week too? Were you doubling down? I forget who your all
last week was Bo Nix. It's not Bo Nix this week.
Now I want to take in Bo Nix. All right, who is your guy? 'Cause I specifically did not take Bo Nix because I thought you were going to take him. So I'm going to have 2 boom quarterbacks. So
Okay.
here you go. You could go first. Who do you got?
Going with my guy in that division, Justin Herbert, whose last 4 games at quarterback have been great. He has finished with 24, 19, 20, and 24 points. 3 of those last 4 games finished in the top 12, all 4 in the top 3 of the last 4 finished in the top 10, all 4 in the top 12. The passing volume has been going up since their bye week. He has improved drastically, and so have his fantasy points because of it. Now he gets the Ravens defense, will have the second most points per game to the quarterback. By far the easiest matchup that he's had to play on his schedule, and that Jim versus John Harbaugh. Hopefully you get that Monday Night Miracle. I am thinking that he is going to finish in the top 10 for 4 out of 5 straight weeks.
So our anonymous source that gives us the information of who we need to change and who didn't pulled an oopsie, because I also have Justin Herbert as my all boom quarterback. Just to back up Nick here, the Ravens have allowed 7 quarterbacks to score 17 plus fantasy points this week, and the over-under right now is set at 50.5, which is the highest of the week. But since I did want to use Bo Nix originally, I don't have notes, but I'm gonna rip off of it. So Bo Nix will be my all boom quarterback this week. So Bo Nix is facing the Las Vegas Raiders, who currently 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Again, I'm going off the cuff here, guys. They allow the 8th most fantasy points to quarterbacks, an average of 19 fantasy points per game. Bo Nix has been on fire as well. So let me pull up his game logs here again, because I did not have the notes written down.
I have it from my takeaways. So real quick, I'll give you some stats. I'll help you out here since we both got an audible and it's a my guy. He's the QB7 on the year. Right now, the last 4 games that he has played, he has 11 touchdowns and 1 interception. He has 4 rushing touchdowns on the year. He has over 5 rushing attempts in 7 games this year. He's averaging 257 yards per game over his last 4. He is on an absolute heater right now.
So since week 5 is when things turned around. He didn't play well against your Jets in week 4, but since week 5, he has double-digit fantasy points in 1, 2, 3, 4 in 7 consecutive games. He is over, is it 7? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yes, 7. He has over 20 fantasy points in 4 of those 7 games, and his 3rd highest total of the season was week 5 against the Raiders, scoring 23.1 fantasy points. Bo Nix has definitely come into his own. He's gotten better and better as the weeks go on, and the Raiders are just in shambles right now, for being particularly honest with you, Nick. I thought Antonio Pierce was a good hire, but he doesn't know who to start at quarterback. They've traded Adams. I could possibly see a couple players checking out. So I think Bo Nix should be locked into your lineups this week, especially with bye weeks. Josh Allen, I'm trying to think who's on bye here. There's a lot of players on bye, but Josh Allen's on bye. Kirk Cousins is on bye. I know there's a bunch of teams that are on bye this week. Joe Burrow's on bye. So that's a couple of your top 5 guys right there. So anyway, Bo Nix will be my all boom quarterback this week, who again, he was going to be my number 1 choice, and I thought Nick would take him. So I went with Herbert. But anyway, I think we're both very high on these quarterbacks. So that's okay that we tag team that part of the segment at least. So who is your first all boom running back for week 12?
I'm going with Tyrone Tracy going up against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
I thought about picking him. I did not, but I do put my stamp of approval on that take.
He has been Tampa has been very bad against the running back position, allowing the 7th most points per game this season. Now they get a QB change to Tommy Cutlets. Nick, I love me some Tommy Cutlets, and you know what you know how we say Jameis Winston looks one place, it's straight down the field. You know where Tommy Cutlets looks? Right behind him to hand it off to the running back. That's exactly what we're going to from Tyrone Tracy in this game. In 5 of his last 6 games, he has over 16 carries, 3 of those games over 100 yards, now coming off the bye. Dable coaching for his career. There is no way he's putting in Tommy Cutlets, trusting him to throw the ball 40 to 50 times in this game. They are going to have to hand the ball to Tracy. I'm expecting around 20 carries, close to 100 yards, and hopefully he hits the end zone and gives you that huge week.
My first running back is a running back combination because I don't know who's going to start, but I'm taking the starter, and it's whoever's starting for the Chiefs. So they're facing the Panthers, and I love picking on the Panthers every week because they allow the most fantasy points to running backs, an average of 25.7. I'm pretty sure they've allowed 15 plus fantasy points, and I think 8 running backs or something like that this season. It's a crazy number. And as for Hunt and Pacheco, they've both been very productive in this Chiefs offense. For Kareem Hunt, he's at 13 plus fantasy points in 5 out of 6 games. It does look like Pacheco is going to return. And if he does, he had 15 plus fantasy points in both of the 2 games that he's played this season. I am a little bit worried about the the committee situation, but I think it kind of makes both of them playable this week, as they're going to want to get Pacheco's feet wet, hopefully get him in the end zone, and then Kareem Hunt can gash them towards the end, as the Chiefs will be up pretty big in this game. It should be a positive game script. Chiefs coming off a loss to the Bills, their first loss of the season, facing a terrible Panthers team. This should be a Kansas City Chiefs, but I don't know what the spread is. It's probably 8, but they should probably win by 10, 12, 15, whatever the number is, but it should be a good rushing game for both Hunt and Pacheco. But the boom is for whoever is starting. So if Pacheco is starting, he is my boom. If he's not starting, then it is Kareem Hunt. So I did want to clarify that one. You're muted. Nobody can hear you.
Now you can. Kansas City, 10.5 point favorite, 42 over under on the game.
Yeah, take it. How much did the Lions win by last week? Did you win your bet?
I did. I had the Lions minus 39.5, and
Amazing.
I won on 20-1 odds.
Amazing.
Turned $1 into $21.
Amazing. And I think I told you guys like a week before the game that they were going to win by like a good 15 fantasy
Oh
points.
yeah, they crushed them.
All right, Nick, who's your second all boom running back? And I'll be honest. So I had a little bit of an oopsie in my lineup. So I couldn't use George Pickens do the Thursday Night Football, so I had to take him out. And I know one of Nick's receivers. So this morning, I had to go and dig deep and find some guys. And I ended up getting a third running back in my lineup. So I was kind of shocked that this guy wasn't on your team. So who do you got?
I have Rachaad White, whose last 4 games have been very solid. Nick and I both really like Bucky Irving, and he's come into his own role. But Rachaad White has not lost his. His last 4 games, 29, 16, 19, and 13. That 13 was against Kansas City. His target share in those games, 6, 6, 3, and 7. He has 4 receiving touchdowns in that span, 5 total touchdowns in that span. Tampa's running a dual threat running back system. We know it works with Gibbs and Montgomery. It's working out for White and Bucky, but they're doing more of the Ingram Kamara style. Gibbs and Monty are just like, we'll use you every single way that we can, no problem. So the PPR upside's been great. The touchdown upside's been great. And this is an explosive offense. I really like the matchup here. I like the opportunity coming off the bye. It checks a lot of boxes for Rachaad White to continue to be a safe option with a high upside for your fantasy team.
My second running back is a guy who's appeared on this team a couple times this year on both sides of the ball. It's Ramondre Stevenson, facing off against the Dolphins, who allow the 9th most fantasy points to running backs, an average of 21.6. 6 backs have scored 14-plus fantasy points against the Dolphins this season, and that does include Ramondre Stevenson in Week 5. He scored 15.2 points against the Dolphins. Stevenson also played the Dolphins twice last season, averaging 11 fantasy points, so I think there's a good chance of a boom here. Drake May has elevated the Patriots as a team. They're competing, and the Patriots could possibly even win this game. I think the Dolphins are playing with house money, so they're just going to say F it and go for it on 4th down a lot. And we'll probably win this game, but I think this Patriots team with Drake May is going to compete. And Stevenson get a couple dump offs, get in the end zone. So I see a really good game for him taking place. So your wide receivers, who's your first receiver?
I'm going with Marvin Harrison Jr., who has been an absolute letdown so far.
So I thought about that one. I thought about that one this morning, and I did not put him, so I did not know you had him, but I'm glad one of us had it.
Yeah. So high ceiling, low floor. That's kind of been the story of his season. But Arizona's on a heater. They're coming off one of the best stretches that they've had of the Kyler Murray era. I believe they're on a 3 or 4 game winning streak at this point. And they have not won back-to-back games since 2021. This is the first streak of 2 consecutive wins in a row that they've had. So coming now off the bye, going up to Seattle. Seattle coming off their biggest win of the season. This
biggest win in 3 years. Biggest win in a long time.
The biggest win of the Geno era for sure.
Yes.
So this has been great for him. But Marv has not had a very easy schedule. He's had 6 straight games against teams that rank top 10 against the wide receiver position. This is the easiest matchup he has had since Week 4. This is his opportunity after the bye. We usually see the rookies get their breakout at this point of the year after their bye, a later bye. Maybe we see a little bit more favorable. We have not seen him get 8 targets since Week 3 or Week 4. I'm expecting him to get that big target share against Seattle, a team that has not been great against wide receiver. They're close to the middle of the pack, but they're not one of the better teams against them.
I'm going to go with Malik Neighbors here. And I know there's a quarterback change, but I think Malik Neighbors is just one of those receivers that the talent of the quarterback doesn't matter. That's how talented Neighbors is. So Neighbors is facing the Bucs defense in a positive matchup who will allow the 6th most fantasy points to wide receivers, an average of 30.7. I think the game script will call for the Giants to play from behind. Baker will have Mike Evans back, probably put up a lot of points early on, and the Giants will be playing from behind. Neighbors has double-digit fantasy points in 7 of 8 games that he's played this season. I know that Daniel Jones has been the quarterback the entire time, and he's the best quarterback on the Giants, but I can't believe they're not playing Drew Lock. That's a real slap in the face since when they traded for Lock or signed him, he didn't sign with Seattle because the Giants told him he would be the for sure number 2 and could have a chance at playing. So it's kind of dirty to my man Drew Lock with a big win last year for the Hawks when he was starting to play with Gino. But anyway, I think Neighbors will still have a good game. Good matchup. The bye weeks are really, really tricky. So if you thought about benching Neighbors, don't. And that's basically my message is he's too talented to bench at this point, especially in a positive matchup. He was facing like the Bears or the Dolphins or the Broncos, a team that's good against receivers, then I'd be a little bit more hesitant. But because it's a positive matchup, I'm still okay with Lock and Neighbors in your lineups. Wide receiver 2, who do you have?
I'm going with Ladd McConkey. I'm making the stack with the quarterback and Justin.
I wanted the stack, and I can't believe that our source did not catch this, but I did want the stack of both. So that's the guy that I knew.
So Ravens currently allow the most points to the wide receiver position. We've watched guys like Jamar Chase absolutely cook them this year. By the way, fun fact, it's totally okay that Joe Burrow and his kicker missed field goals, and now we can blame the kicker, but we couldn't do it for the Jets earlier this year. And it's totally okay that we'll cut Joe Burrow, who's been a stat sheet stuffer this year, but Justin Herbert doesn't get credit when he gets a new coach. Just saying, not saying what I'm saying, but you know what I'm saying. Anyway, Ladd McConkey averaging over 16 points in his last 4 games. Rookie receiver, keep the momentum going this late in the year in his easiest matchup of the season in the Jim versus John showdown.
Yeah, my man Joe Burrow's been great. Just got to defend my guy. I drafted as like quarterback 6 in a lot of 2 leagues, and I'm pretty thrilled we drafted him at quarterback 6 in our 6-point quarterback leagues. He's been a great stat sheet stuffer, and he's played very well. He's definitely had some opportunities late in games that he should have converted, and that's on him. But I blame more the coach than the kicker.
Okay. But when I said it for Herbert, for Staley for the last 3 years, it was no, you don't finish in the big games. And now he gets the coach and we don't give him any credit. He lost all of his weapons, 7 wins. I don't know, man.
Listen,
all the people out there.
Just wait until Burrow has like Bill Belichick next year. And then
yeah, exactly. That's what we need him to get. Bill Belichick. That's how we'll make it back to the Super Bowl. Yep. All right, let's go.
I think he would because you get that defense under control. All right, so my second wide receiver here is Josh Downs. Josh Downs is facing the Lions, who allow the 8th most fantasy points to wide receivers, an average of 30 points per game. I love picking on the Lions in terms of busting running backs, but then booming receivers. By the way, why did I not bust Jonathan Taylor? Now that I think about it, that's a little preview. Maybe Nick hasn't busted. I don't know, but I do not, and I kind of wish I had. Anyway, Lions allow the 8th most fantasy points to wide receivers. They also allow the most fantasy points to slot wide receivers, where Josh Downs does play most of the snaps. Josh Downs has been the most productive wide receiver on the Colts. He's doing what we thought Michael Pittman would do. He has double-digit fantasy points in 8 out of 10 games played. He's averaging 14.7 points per game. He's a wide receiver 16 on the season. Again, exactly what we thought Michael Pittman would do. He had 19.4 fantasy points with Anthony Richardson last week. He's averaging just under 15 fantasy points with Richardson in 3 or 4 games this season. But that's okay. I would keep him locked into a matchup where the Lions offense has been obliterating opponents. I think that the Colts will have to throw a bit more and try to score a bit more points to even compete in this game. So the game script could work within Josh Downs' favor in this one. Tight end, who do you have?
Going with Hunter Henry. Listen, we know that tight ends, they benefit from rookie quarterbacks, and Hunter Henry has done just that in 4 of his 6 games. With Drake May, he has over 12 fantasy points in each of those. Dolphins kind of middle of pack against the tight end position, but they are one of the best teams against the wide receiver position. So I'm expecting that Drake May is going to have to look multiple times, and especially in the red zone, towards this guy, Hunter Henry. I also agree with Nick. I think Ramondre and Henry have been the 2 biggest benefactors from Drake May. I think that momentum continues here.
I'm going to go with Dallas Goedert. He's facing the Rams defense, who allow the 5th most fantasy points to tight ends this season, an average of 11.9. 5 tight ends have scored double digits against the Rams this season. As for Dallas Goedert, he's returned from injury and has double-digit fantasy points in each of his 2 games since returning from the injury. On top of that, we love over-unders and we love Vegas. This is the 3rd highest over-under of the week, sitting at 48.5. Sunday Night Football game, primetime game, and honestly, Nick, a big game for both teams. The Rams obviously in the hunt for the NFC West and are finally healthy, and they'll be vying for a wild card. And as for the Eagles, I mean, they have full control of the NFC East, but they're also trying to get that second or third seed, or maybe even the first seed if the Lions drop a couple games. And the Eagles have really kicked it into high gear over the past, I'd say, 6 to 8 weeks. The defense has improved. The offense is playing well. So a big game on Sunday Night Football should have a lot of offense and should be a good football game for us to watch. So can't complain about that. So your flex play, who do you have?
Going with Devontae Smith, another guy kind of like Marvin Harrison, who's been.
I hope you're right.
Yeah, no, I hope I'm
you're
right. He's a guy I've kind of been in on. I do not own him in any leagues as high as I've been on him this year, even as a trade for candidate. But he's been, like I mentioned, he's been inconsistent. The thing that I will say is Devontae Smith has never been this inconsistent in his career. He's never had back-to-back bad games till this past week where he had 2 very, very bad games. So this is a good spot. Like Nick mentioned, one of the highest over-unders on the week. It should be a get-right position for him in what should be a very high-scoring game with hopefully a lot of passing volume as well.
I'm going to go with the guy who I thought should be one of our boom running backs, but then wasn't. I'm going to go with Brian Robinson, facing the Cowboys, who led the 3rd most fantasy points to running backs this season, an average of 25.4. I boomed Joe Mixon last week. I didn't really have many options on my all boom team, but I said Mixon's going to have a great game, and he did have a great game. And I think I even said, if you need a Monday night miracle of 25 plus fantasy points, you're going to get it from Mixon. We'd have to go back and watch the tape on that one. I'm pretty sure it's what I said. He gashed the Cowboys for 35 fantasy points on Monday Night Football and obliterated me in one of the leagues that I was facing him in. As for Brian Robinson, who does have the positive matchup, had 14 fantasy points last week after coming off the hamstring injury. We know hammies do kind of linger a little bit. So coming off the week, having a good week against a tough Eagles defense, now gets a much more positive matchup against the Cowboys. And the Commanders really need to win this game and should win this game. They are actually in playoff contention, which is crazy to even say and think about. And the Cowboys are not. The Cowboys are dead in the water. And I've been saying for weeks, don't play your Cowboys. They're dead in the water, and that's going to continue. So a good matchup for Brian Robinson. I think we'll have a good game for you guys this week. And I have him in a league, so maybe he'll have a good. I guess for me too, he'll have a good game. So
yeah.
Going to the all bust team, unlike the all boom team, again, I do reiterate this every single week for new viewers. Unlike the all boom team, anybody can go on the all bust team. We have successfully put a boom on, or bust, I should say, on Jamar Chase, Tyreek Hill, Jonathan Taylor. So any star that we think is going to have a bad game is eligible for the all bust team. So who is your quarterback for week 12?
Well, first off, you always mention that I had the all boom priority. You had the all bust priority. So originally I knew 2 of your guys. And then when I tried to replace them, I found out 2 more of your guys.
That's the tricky part when it comes to replacing.
Yeah. So I know over half of Nick's all bust team, and I will put my stamp of approval on those guys.
Just so you guys know. So basically how the process goes is, do you know my quarterback just for the sake of it? Is that one you know? No? Okay. So for the sake of it, Nick, we'll send our teams to our third party, and he'll confirm and say. So I'll use. I had Ladd McConkey on the all boom team, so he said change Ladd McConkey. So at that point, I have to find another receiver. But Nick still has first dibs on all his receivers. I can't remember off the top of my head all 3 that you used. But if on Marvin Harrison, so I thought about using Marvin Harrison this morning. I did not actually send Marvin Harrison to our anonymous source, so I didn't know that Nick had him. But if I had sent Marvin Harrison, he would say you can't use him. But then I know another one of Nick's team, so that does happen occasionally. So anyway, Take it away, Nick. You don't know my quarterbacks. Let's see who the different quarterback that you had is that you wanted priority over.
So for this all bust team, I went with a lot of studs on it. A lot of my guys, historical my guys, current my guys, some of Nick's guys. Well, we start off with one of my guys from last season in Jordan Love. Going up against the San Francisco 49ers, a top 10 team against the quarterback position. San Francisco coming off a horrendous loss. The Packers coming off a massive win against the Bears. 2 divisional rivalry matchups coming off of it. Now face each other in the playoff rematch. Maybe you think Jordan Love goes crazy because he wants that redemption. I think San Francisco is a buy low and the Packers are a sell high at the moment based off what happened this past week. In that game, the only time that these 2 teams, or that Jordan Love has faced the 49ers, in that game, he had 190 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. It would have resulted in a 12-point fantasy game. So I am saying that I don't know if Jordan Love will have 12 fantasy points. He might have a little bit more, but I don't think you're going to get I don't think he's going to be any higher than the QB 12. And to me, that's worth pivoting.
I'm going to go with the guy that I think Nick has put on the bus team a couple times. That's our former Jets quarterback, Sam Darnold, facing off against the Bears. And the Bears, I say it every week when we do this segment. The Bears are a just like travesty, cursed, bum franchise that can't figure it out, especially on the offensive side of things. But on the defensive side of things, they've been pretty stout for the past couple of years, including this year. The Bears allow the fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks, only an average of 12.3. Only one quarterback has scored multiple touchdowns against the Bears this season. This is also the second lowest over-under game of the week at 39.5. So with that said, you're expecting a low-scoring game, probably expecting Sam Darnold to turn into a pumpkin. If you have another option, Jared Goff, Herbert, Tua, there are better options out there that I would put in there over Sam Darnold. You're a first running back that you're busting this week.
So I said studs, and Nick mentioned his name earlier, Jonathan Taylor.
I'm glad that you did because I didn't even think about it. So I'm glad that one of us did. So take it away.
So first off, the Lions have been one of the elite teams against the running back position. Not good, not great, elite. They've been one of the top 5 against the running back position. And he's got Anthony Richardson as quarterback. Surprisingly, in my research, does look like JT actually has his higher high games with Anthony Richardson at quarterback than Joe Flacco. But there's no PPR upside in that. And in a game where Nick already mentioned it, the game script should lean all Detroit's way. There is absolutely no way that Jonathan Taylor is going to get enough PPR work based off what we've seen with Anthony Richardson, and he's not going to get the touches. There's games where teams need to throw to complete and to the running back. That's what this is, and it's just not the Anthony Richardson formula. It's the horrible matchup. The touchdown upside is not there. There is very low PPR work. I'm not saying bench him. If you do have a pivot, maybe you do. I don't know if you can with 6 teams on bye this week. But I do think it's a very big temper your expectations week for your superstar running back.
I'm going to go with, and I love doing this in games, I'm going to go with the opposite running back tandem for the Carolina Panthers here. I think Chuba Hubbard is going to start, but if Brooks is starting, this applies for him too. Whoever faces the Chiefs will always be on the all-bust team in terms of running backs because the Chiefs allow the fewest fantasy points to running backs, an average of only 12.8. Only one back has scored more than 13 fantasy points, and is James Cook last week, who did have a touchdown, and he also only totaled 2 touchdowns, and he only totaled 27 yards on the ground last week. So the touchdowns did help him, but he didn't play well. This should be a very bad game script for the Panthers. I see an angry Chiefs team that just wants to smother a really bad team, an offensive explosion, and a defensive masterclass. Bryce Young could throw a couple picks, could be some fumbles, some sacks, etc. That does not bode well for whoever is starting at running back. Keep them both on the bench this week.
That is one of the guys I wanted as well. So echo that everything Nick said.
All right.
Next, another superstar running back. And Nick, I'm sorry because I did just trade him to you, Kyren Williams. I know we talked about this high over under in this matchup. Well, the Eagles defense has been elite this year. They've also been a top 5 team against the running back position. And now Kyren is on a slow stretch right now. 4 straight games without a touchdown after that insane run carrying over from last year with double-digit straight games with a touchdown. The Eagles have been the toughest matchup that he has had and the toughest matchup he will have for the rest of the season. The workload and the efficiency have been great in the last 3 games, but with the lack of touchdowns, he has scored under 12 in each of those games. I think he gets around that 12 number, but again, for a guy that you drafted in the middle of the second round, that's not good enough. So I would not have all the confidence in the world that Kyren booms this week. I think safe floor with the workload, but you're really going to need him to get that touchdown, which the Eagles do not allow a lot of them to the running back.
I'm going to go with DeAndre Swift, the guy who Nick ultimately cursed, but in a good way this season. I mean, he used some voodoo magic week 4 that got him to arise from the grave. Think like the Undertaker gif when he's laying down and just pops up out of the casket. That's what DeAndre Swift did as of week 4 or 5. But tough matchup this week. He's facing the Vikings defense, who've allowed the second fewest points to running backs, an average of 14.5. They've been very good at just about against every back this season, every team this season. Only 4 backs have scored double-digit fantasy points against the Vikings this season. That's over 10 weeks. It's also the second lowest over-under at 39.5. I just don't see a lot of points being scored in this game from anybody, really. So I would try to keep Swift on the bench. It might be tough since he's running back. You probably have to play him, but if you're deep at running back, I would try to get him on your bench if you can.
Yeah.
Wide receivers, who do you have?
Nick, by the way, Swift, I also was going to bust, but I also realized if I bust him, he might start going on a hot streak. Anyway, so the wide receiver position, a guy that's been on both sides of the ball plenty of times. It is a Flowers. Going up against the Chargers, one of the better teams against the wide receiver position. He has been a boom bust on workload since the beginning of this year. He has 5 games over 9 targets, and he has 3 games under 4 targets in his first 8 games of the year. That is literally high usage, low usage for wide receivers. The last 3 consecutive weeks, he has 6 targets in each of those games. The thing that's been the outlier in there is he has 3 touchdowns in his span. Touchdowns have not been a huge part of his game on the front half of the year. So if he gets those 6 targets and the touchdowns come down to earth, that's less than 10 fantasy points. That's an easy enough bust candidate for me.
Who do I want to go with first here? I have 3 receivers. They're all kind of the same. Let's go with Tank Dell here. Facing the Titans defense, who allow the 5th fewest fantasy points, 2 wide receivers, an average of only 22 points. You know, that sounds big, but that's actually much lower than a lot of others. He's the second option now behind Nico Collins. And in back-to-back games, I think Nico Collins has now played in both. Tank Dell's at under 10 fantasy points. Joe Mixon is just the horse of this team. And that's why I said before the offseason that Mixon was going to be one of the steals of the draft. I'm still kicking myself for not following my own advice. And I don't want to say I passed over Joe Mixon. It's just I loaded up on running backs pretty early in my drafts in a lot of leagues and then didn't have a reason to draft Mixon when I needed a receiver. But I wish I had because, you know, everything I said about him has come true, unfortunately for me. So anyway, so because of Joe Mixon being such a good player this season, D'Amico Ryans is getting the exact kind of team that he wanted. Run the football, play defense, control the clock. That's how you win Super Bowls. And that's great for the Texans, but not great for Tank Dell, who's just not getting the target share that he should. He has also never played the Titans. I don't know if it's a good or a bad thing, but I just wanted to mention that. He got injured last season before they played the Titans twice, and then they're going to play the Titans twice over the next 7 weeks. So did want to mention that. It's also a low over-under game. It's the third lowest at 40.5. So again, they are expecting a defensive game that will probably not see a lot of points in it. So if Tank Dell doesn't get in the end zone, I think it'll be very tough to justify him getting over 12 fantasy points this week. Your second receiver, who do you have?
I'm going with Cortland Sutton, another theme of my guys that I'm busting. Vegas has been top 5 against the wide receiver position this year. I know Nick has Bo Nix on his all boom team, which I would have comfortably taken. But they've been good against the wide receivers. Cortland Sutton earlier this year when they played, which was a home game, had 5.2 points in this matchup. In Sutton's career, he averages 4 catches for 50 yards. He's not eclipsed 7 targets against the Raiders since 2021. So this is a team that has pretty much had his number since Russell Wilson has gotten there, and he just has not been able to break that habit, get a ton of workload in this opportunity. So I'm a big fan of history repeats itself, especially in these division matchups. I think it's a fine time to fade Cortland Sutton.
Second receiver I'm going to bust here is going to be Jordan Addison. Again, I love using the Bears for examples like this because the Bears allow the second fewest fantasy points, 2 wide receivers, an average of only 21.4. The Bears defense has only surrendered 6 touchdowns, 2 wide receivers over 10 games this season. As for Addison, he played the Bears twice last year and only averaged about 10 fantasy points against them over 2 games, which is okay, but not a booming number for sure. He is a streaky player. He's picked it up a little bit in the last 3 weeks, but if you look at his last 5, he has under 10 fantasy points in 3 of his last 5. It's also, again, the second lowest over-under of the week. If you follow Vegas, not a lot of points will be scored in this one. So I would try to keep a lot of Bears and Vikings on your bench. You probably can't bench Aaron Jones and Jefferson, but everybody else in this game I would really consider benching. Tight end, who do you have?
My backup tight end, because Nick got my guy on the week, which is totally fine. I'm going with Dalton Schultz, and I didn't think Dalton Schultz should be eligible for this team, but he still started in 52% of sleeper leagues. He is still rostered in over 90%. So I think it's reasonable to say if you're rostered in 90% of leagues, I can bust you. So anyway, he's played 11 games this year. He has not had the bye, and he has not scored more than 10 points in any single game this year. The Titans are a top 5 team against the tight end position. Short, simple, to the point. You need double digits from your tight end position, and this is not the matchup to do it, and he has not showed us that he can break that number all year, so I'm not going to expect him to.
I'm going to go with Kate Otten, who Nick wanted, and it's just very simple here in playing the matchup. The Giants' defense is a pretty good front seven, but they're also very stout against tight ends. They allow the fewest fantasy points to tight ends, an average of 5.2. Otten's had an uptick in targets and touchdowns since Mike Evans and Chris Godwin both got hurt. But Big Mike's coming back this week, as far as we know. He's practicing. I'm pretty sure he's going to play. So I'm sure Baker Mayfield will try to get in rhythm with him. Nick really likes Rashad White and the rushing game that they'll have over there. So it could be rushing game and Mike Evans. And Otten will still probably be the number 2 target going forward. And the other plus for Otten is that the Giants are in shambles. I think they're a broken team at this point. I mean, players are basically saying out loud that they know that Daniel Jones is the best quarterback and the Giants aren't playing him due to money reasons. So I could see a couple players maybe quitting on them. But again, it's a tougher matchup. Probably will be tough to bench him if you're in a 12-man league and, you only have X amount of tight ends. And if you are starting on, you probably don't have one of those top 3 or 4 tight ends. So probably tough to bench him. So this one's more of a temporary expectations for a guy that does have a tough matchup. Your flex player, who do you have? Last player of the all-bust team.
So this is my 4th option at my 4th backup option. I guess I could say 5th because I really wanted to put Tank Dell and then opted not to because I knew Nick would have Tank Dell on the bus team, just from knowing our co-host so well for 4 years. But I'm going with one of Nick's guys and one of my guys, Tony Pollard, going up against Houston, one of the top 5 teams against the running back position. Since Tajay Spears has came back from injury, he has 9 carries in each of those games. 9 carries is not good enough. In all of his other games this year, all but one, he had at least 16 carries. So he's gotten the workload. Now he's got a very tough matchup here going up against Houston. Again, top 5 against the running back position. I do not think this is a good spot. The rest of his season's really good and really favorable for him, but this is a very bad matchup.
I'm going to go with Jacoby Myers facing off against the Broncos, who allow the fewest fantasy points to wide receivers, an average of 21.1. Patrick Surtain could be shadowing him. The one thing I do want to say in Myers' favor is he had a pretty good game against the Broncos earlier this season, and even last year he had 2 good games. But the Raiders, another team in the theme that I've said here, I just think they're a team that's kind of quit on themselves a little bit. So I just don't want to start a Raider. It's also a low over-under 41.5. It's not top 3 lowest, but that is a very low over-under when a lot of them are in the upper to mid 40s. So not expecting a ton of points in that one. And I can't even tell you who's starting at quarterback for the Raiders because it's a revolving door at this point. So tough matchup. Not a good team. Not a lot of points to be scored. This is one I'd also try to keep on the bench if you can.
He was one of the guys I had on the list that got vetoed initially. My only concern would be Bowers has been so good. What if Surtain actually goes on Bowers for a lot of the game? But at the same time, to Nick's point, the Broncos have just been so good against the receiver position, period. So I fully back the take.
Before we get out of here, we're going to do a waiver wire deep sleeper, a player that we think we should pick up before this week. So you don't have to pick him up off the waiver wire next Tuesday. So Nick, I will let you go first.
So Nick and I agree this is probably the biggest outlier on the waiver wire in terms of roster percentage to where he should be owned. It's Nick Westbrook-Ikhine, wide receiver for the Tennessee Titans. He is currently rostered in less than 6% of your ESPN leagues. Ridley and him have the easiest rest of season schedule for the wide receiver position. In his last 6 games, he has 5 touchdowns. That is crazy to think of a wide receiver on a poor team, but the consistency has been there. Now he's coming off his biggest game of the year, 117 yards and a touchdown, top 10 wide receiver on the week. Since the DeAndre Hopkins trade, he also has over 85% snap share in those 4 games. He had less than 50% snap share in the games beforehand. 3 of those 4 games without DeAndre Hopkins, he has over 11.9 points. And we know the game script is always going to be good. And we know the matchup is easy. And he has proven to have high touchdown upside every single week with Will Levis and with whoever the backup quarterback they wanted to throw in there. It's slipping my mind. Mason Rudolph. There you go. With whoever that backup is, they've consistently been giving him the ball for those red zone targets, and he has consistently delivered. He also had 6 targets this past week, which was his most in any game this season. So I think he needs to be rostered at this point in more than 5% of leagues, at least. If you have a deeper league, he is worth the ad.
So I could not find a player that I truly loved that could truly back my opinion on. So instead of a player, I'm going to go with players, specifically 11 players. If you're at week 12, if you are primed for a playoff spot, and if you have an extra spot on your bench, I want you to go pick up the Eagles defense. And you have 2 weeks to do so. They're facing the Rams this week. And if they are rostered, don't worry about it because they're probably going to give up a good chunk to the Rams and then a good chunk to the Baltimore Ravens, who the next opponent is. So they will probably be dropped over the next 2 weeks. But here's why I want you to pick them up now if you are in a good position for the playoffs, or if you just have an open roster spot, just roster them. They have 6 consecutive weeks with double-digit fantasy points. And Nick has already spoken about how they kind of retooled their defense. I believe Vic Fangio is the DC, and I speak about this a lot on this show and to friends. There are just some coaches that are meant to be DCs, meant to be OCs, meant to be quarterback coaches, etc., and just not good head coaches. And that's okay. It's with anything in life. I'm a big wrestling guy, and there are just some pro wrestlers that are not going to be WWE champion, but they're a great tag team champion. That's just how it is. So Vic Fangio is a great DC, and he's proving that with the Eagles. So going into the season, the Eagles had allowed a lot of points to receivers and some other positions, but here's where they stand after 11 weeks. They allow the 5th lowest fantasy points to running backs, the 5th fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks, the 6th fewest fantasy points to receivers, and the 3rd fewest fantasy points to tight ends. Their matchups after the Ravens, going into before the playoffs is week 14, hosting Carolina. Then here's your playoffs: hosting Pittsburgh, at Washington, who they just only, and at least in my defensive formats and both of my sleeper leagues, 11 fantasy points against Washington this past Thursday. They go at Washington week 15, then your championship week hosting the Cowboys. The Eagles will be very competitive up until week 16, 17. They will be vying for a top seed. They will not be benching players. At the least, if you pick them up now, you will definitely play them against Carolina week 14 to get you in the playoffs. And if you get to your championship, you're probably playing them against Dallas. I can't think of a better matchup to play. So if you want to roster a couple defenses, the Eagles is one I definitely want to roster at this point. Even if you get stuck with them against Pittsburgh and Washington, Pittsburgh is just not going to put up a lot of points. That probably will end up being a lower scoring game. Probably get a couple sacks on Russell Wilson. And then at Washington, again, they just played Jaden Daniels very, very tough. So I don't see that changing within 4 weeks' time. So not a player, but with your playoffs coming up, I think it's very worth rostering the Eagles defense at this point.
You did mention something in there that I am going to argue with you on real quick. You mentioned that Vic Fangio was made to be a DC and not a head coach. I guarantee Woody Johnson makes him an offer this offseason. I have no doubt in my mind. He loves those former Broncos between Adam Gase and Daniel Hackett. It's either going to be him or Vance Joseph that gets an offer from the
Well, respectfully, Woody Johnson may be the worst owner in
is the worst.
He's very bad. He's very
and you know what's sad? He might actually be the worst owner in New York sports when you consider that James Dolan is also an owner of the team. But regardless,
we get crap on Dolan all we want. Like, I don't like how he does with his ticket sales and stuff. But you know what? Our Knicks are good, and I love watching our Knicks.
That's true.
A lot of money. He does not mind spending money. And they have put together a championship caliber roster for the first time in me and Nick's lifetime. So as much as I don't like Dolan, for the same reasons I don't like Hal Steinbrenner or Jerry Jones, where they're okay with just competing and selling tickets. I'm excited that our Knicks are very competitive for the first time. And the Rangers have been very competitive for the past decade, but unfortunately just, again, haven't been able to get over the hump. Same thing with our Yankees. Anyway. All right, guys. So that is our last show, heading into week 12 before the live, obviously. And if we did not answer all of your questions, we talked about 14 booms, 14 busts. But again, we can't talk about everybody. I'm sure you have lineup questions and decisions to be made. Join our live show Sunday morning, 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time, YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram, PrimeTime Fantasy Football Podcast. If you're watching this show live, drop a like on this video. If you're watching on YouTube, if you're not subscribed to our channel yet, please subscribe. It's PrimeTime Fantasy Football Podcast. And hit that bell icon so you get notifications every time that we go live. If you're listening on an audio streaming platform, or maybe you have a long drive or flight coming up and you need an audio streaming platform, go to iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcast, or Anchor and subscribe to the PrimeTime Fantasy Football Podcast. And then drop a 5-star rating and a review If you enjoy our content, we'd appreciate that. We're also available on social media, Primetime Fantasy Football Podcast on Instagram and Primetime FF Pod on Twitter to answer any questions that you have during the week. So thanks again for your support. Hopefully you enjoyed this episode, and we'll talk to you guys on the Week 12 live show this Sunday.